Let's go ahead and move on to some of the things that the Congress is up to. So, in addition to passing yet another resolution on anti-Semitism, this one condemning the protest chant from the river to the sea as being anti-Semitic. No word on whether it's anti-Semitic when it comes from Bibi himself or from the Likud party charter or from his son or whatever. Anyway, they also are convening yet another panel and calling forth yet another university president to speak on their actions to combat anti-Semitism on campus. The Columbia University president is set to testify to that same congressional panel that caused the whole uproar last time around, which we, of course, covered here and led to a number of them losing their jobs. That president is out with a Wall Street Journal op-ed to try to sort of, set the stage for what they're going to say. The headline here at Columbia University president, what I plan to tell Congress tomorrow, anti-Semitism and calls for genocide have no place at a university. My priority has been the safety and security of our community, but that leaves plenty of room for robust disagreement and debate. Let me read you a little bit of this. Also, her notes were leaked about how she plans to talk about this issue, and very similar to what's laid out in the op-ed here. But the op-ed reads, while disagreement and debate are to be welcomed at a university, that should happen within specific parameters. Calling for the genocide of a people, whether they are Israelis or Palestinians, Jews, Muslims, or anyone else, has no place in a university community. Such words are outside the bounds of legitimate debate and unimaginably harmful. Second, while there may be some easy cases, drawing the line between permissible and impermissible campus speech is enormously difficult. And then she continues in thinking about these boundaries of permissible speech. One idea we've adopted at Columbia is to define a designated space for protests. This approach allows for fewer limits on speech, usually a desirable value at a university, because those who don't want to hear what is being said need not listen. It also means the core functions of university teaching and learning can continue uninterrupted. There's a few things about this. There's actually a lot to say about this op-ed. First of all, on the alleged calls for genocide, and this came up in the context of the initial congressional hearings that caused such a fuss on this. Mm-hmm. There's no specific examples of students actually doing this. And so are you talking about just a call for equal rights from the river to the sea? Are you talking about the chance to globalize the Intifada? What are you referring to here specifically? Because there's been this pretense that there's some outbreak of outright genocidal language occurring on college campuses. And I'm not going to say there's not a single instance or there isn't genuine anti-Semitism out there. I think that'd be a ridiculous thing to say. But we never seem to see these instances of this supposed call for genocide against the Jews happening on college campuses. So it's left very vague. And then in addition, what you've actually seen in terms of Columbia is a real crackdown on the rights of students, and in a very one-sided way. Columbia is being sued actually right now for unlawfully banning multiple pro-Palestine groups. So the New York Civil Liberties Union and a Palestinian rights organization filed a lawsuit against Columbia University. So that you had Students for Justice in Palestine and Columbia Barnard Jewish Voice for Peace, both banned. And Columbia administrator previously said the groups repeatedly violated college policies like holding unauthorized events and that the gathering included threatening rhetoric and intimidation. But once again, there's no specifics given about what that rhetoric or what that intimidation is. They just sort of came in over the top and shut down these two groups. And you also have an incident, which was pretty horrifying, where a number of pro-Palestine activists were sprayed by some sort of a chemical irritant. There was a recent Al Jazeera documentary about what happened and the investigation, which from the university side has basically gone nowhere into what's effectively a chemical attack against pro-Palestinian demonstrators. Let's watch a little bit of that.
Did you arrest the people using skunk spray? A chemical attack on the students?
Oh my gosh, it smells like someone is dying. We smelled that.
That's when I was hospitalized for severe blurred vision.
These students are describing the moment they suffered an alleged chemical attack during a pro-Palestine rally at one of the world's most prestigious universities. Students say the chemical smelled like skunk, which has been used by Israeli forces against Palestinians.
We're not safe in the West Bank. We're not safe in Gaza. Even in the US, we aren't safe.
In this report, we reveal previously unpublished images and footage of suspicious activity at the protest. More than 2 months after the incident, no suspects have been named, while students speaking up for Palestinian rights have received death threats, been doxxed, and targeted by professors.
Does me being Palestinian, does that inherently mean I'm a terrorist? That's how they're treating us.
So, Emily, to me, the bottom line here of this congressional inquiry is you'll have a lot of people who talked a big game about free speech, who suddenly are dragging a university president before them to demand more censorship and more crackdowns on free speech. And I doubt, at least from the Republican side, we're going to hear much in terms of questioning about the cancellation, the banning of these activist groups, and the investigation into what happened to these students.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that this is a real challenge for conservatives, for elected Republicans who have held all kinds of hearings on campuses in the last several years. And Columbia is a place where that dilemma, I think, is in sharp focus. They had, I'm reading from the very pro-Israel Washington Free Beacon right now, but they have an interesting report. They say, during a January 5th interview with socialist podcast Revolutionary Left Radio, Islamic scholar Mohammed Abdu declared his support for Hamas and the, quote, resistance, the terror group's, quote, dedicated few, he said admiringly, worked in, quote, stealth mode on October 7th to defeat a larger enemy in Israel. Just days later, on January 16th, Columbia University's Middle East Institute extended a, quote, warm welcome to Abdu, the Ivy League school's latest visiting professor in modern Arab studies. And it goes on later in the article to quote him 4 days after October 7th, saying, yes, I'm with the resistance, be it Hamas and Hezbollah and Islamic Jihad. And he talked about false reports accusing Arabs and Muslims of decapitating the heads of children and being rapists. And he said, I might be with Hamas and support the resistance. Absolutely. Look what the 1500 did. They were organized and they worked in stealth mode and they divested. Judith Butler, who is an academic, also has referred to Hamas and Hezbollah as the, quote, resistance for a long time. And I think that's, honestly, I think that's protected speech. I think it's a challenge for conservatives and Republicans to sort of live up to the game that they've talked. Now, whether it's protected speech is somewhat a different question as to whether that's someone worthy of, being a visiting professor of Arab studies. I think it's entirely an ideological disagreement. People can talk about Hamas and Hezbollah in the context of being the resistance. I personally find that to be abhorrent, but it's something that should be debated, obviously, out in the open and not sort of relegated to these corners where it festers. I don't think that's healthy, whether it's happening on the fringes of the alt-right or the sort of fringes in this situation either. If I were the head of Columbia University, I would look at that and I'd be like, well, maybe we need someone who brings like slightly more balance to this question at our school, or slightly more nuance to this question than referring to Hamas and Hezbollah as potentially the resistance and admiringly talking about their stealth mode on October 7th. But I actually think this is a really helpful example for Republicans that it is really difficult to stand up for free speech on campus when it's somebody like this, as opposed to when it's, your own speakers.
Well, that's the point of free speech. That's the whole thing, is it only matters when it's speech that you disagree with, that you may despise, that you may find abhorrent.
Yeah.
That's when the principle actually matters. When it's something everybody's cool with and comfortable with, well, you don't really need those protections because it's going to be fine. In another instance of how quickly the language from the right on all of this has flipped, all these concerns about like student safety. You see that in this instance of the Columbia University president being called to testify about protecting Jewish students, making sure they don't feel unsafe on campus, not because they're physically threatened, but because they might hear something at a protest that makes them feel unsafe. You also had that same safety language being used by USC, and let's put this up on the screen. I find this so disgraceful. So they announced that their valedictorian, Asna Tabasum's commencement speech, has been canceled. The reason is they said, it was necessary to maintain the safety of our campus and students. So Asna was selected valedictorian. She happened to minor in genocide studies. And apparently the university was very fearful that she, as someone who has expressed pro-Palestinian views, might use some of what she learned at their university about genocide and discuss that in her commencement speech. So they just canceled the whole thing altogether. And just so you know that the whole, oh, we're worried about kids' safety and safety at graduation, et cetera, is complete nonsense. When she spoke to them, they couldn't give her any specific examples of credible threats or other legitimate safety issues that they could identify, but they came under all kinds of pressure from the right and from Jewish groups in particular, who pro-Israel groups, I should say, because there are plenty of anti-Zionist Jewish groups at this point as well. They came under a lot of pressure from pro-Israel groups to cancel this speech on a fear for what this accomplished young lady may have to say. She wrote quite an extraordinary response. She said, "I'm surprised my own university has abandoned me." She went on to say that she's a student of history and chose to minor in resistance to genocide and had learned that ordinary people are capable of unspeakable acts of violence when they are taught hate fueled by fear. And due to widespread fear, I was hoping to use my commencement speech to inspire my classmates with a message of hope. By canceling my speech, USC is only caving to fear and rewarding hatred. Matt Taibbi had a notable response to this as well that we can put up on the screen. He says, all sorts of people are blamed for undermining confidence in institutions, but it's usually the institution itself that does the most damage, as in this case. And, not hearing a lot from the usual suspects who used to be all about free speech and against cancel culture, et cetera, at the valedictorian of the school being blocked for speaking because she might say something that they're uncomfortable with.
Yeah, and my position is that ideologically, the people who have been quote unquote canceled on college campuses, and I've worked with a lot of them, I've actually had jobs working on that stuff before, should be more mainstream than someone like the Columbia professor that we were just talking about. But that doesn't matter in this context. The point is that speech is speech. And as long as it's not outright incitement, especially at public universities, but at universities in general, there's nothing new under the sun. You can go back to, for example, here's a great example. Anybody, let's say there were professors of, professors of history, professors of war back in the Cold War that supported the Contras. I don't know that there were a lot of them, but I don't think conservatives would have had a problem about conservatives making this kind of ideological argument that it was necessary to fund the Contras in order to, defeat the Soviet Union and win the Cold War. There's Hanoi Jane, talking about people like Jane Fonda that were supportive of the other side in the Vietnam War that was killing American soldiers, and just making this argument, intellectually building this case that it was morally necessary to support this force of violence because in their perception, they were pushing back on a bigger threat of violence, whatever it is. We act like some of these dilemmas are new, and they're not. There have always been these arguments on campuses, and they have to be aired out on campuses if they're going to be aired out literally anywhere. It should be on college campuses where the academics who are the kind of backbone of the media and the policy world are coming to, the sort of different points on how we think about these things. I agree, Krystal. I think that, there's way too little appetite for true, genuine freedom of expression, the exchange of ideas in the interest of the common good, in the interest of understanding each other. So I don't disagree that this is a real challenge for conservatives. I still think it's a real challenge for the left, and constantly deal with that all the time. But when the going gets tough, the tough get going, and I don't see as much of that as I think we should. But that's no surprise, I guess.
I at least, listen, not to pat myself on the back, but I really made an attempt, even with regard to the next individual we're about to talk about, Tom Cotton, to support free speech, even when I genuinely find it horrifying, right? I have tried my very best to be consistent because that's the whole point. And it's not hard. It was not hard for me in those instances to see, okay, well, this censorship is coming against a, political adversary right now. But, I'm a leftist and no one has been more censored throughout American history than the left. So you can see very clearly, like, these tools may be used against them in this particular instance, but they can be used against my ideology. And by the way, that's not really the point anyway. It's about having a commitment to this bedrock principle, whether it's about your side or their side or something in between. So it has always been clear to me, because there was never any willingness to speak out. Pro-Palestinian people have been getting canceled, long before October 7th. You can ask Mark Lamont Hill and any number of other folks, Norman Finkelstein, how their careers fared when they stepped out of the bipartisan consensus with regards to Israel. And there was never any sort of solidarity with those individuals from the right. So I was under no illusions here, but it's certainly never been more clear that any purported right-wing free speech moment is, outside of some notable exceptions, yourself included, is officially over.
Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.